Introduce our next speaker, Dr. LaFranchi, who I only met yesterday, but whose work I have admired for several years, being a subscriber to the newsletter from the National Breast Cancer Prevention Institute. She is a graduate of Georgetown Medical School, completed residencies both in family medicine as well as in surgery. And she went into medicine with less than 1 in 10, less than 10% of medical schools were physicians. It was a really tough time, and especially to go into surgery. She became aware of the abortion-breast cancer connection in her practice as a surgeon with breast cancer. So I ask you to please welcome Dr. LaFranchi.
Italian, but I am on time. As I promised Father Pahulchek that I would be on time. I only have like 100 and something slides. So, because I'm going to talk pretty fast, I want you to open up your little folder and pull out this little yellow brochure that comes from the Breast Cancer Prevention Institute. Because when I talk fast and you don't quite get it, you're going to have 90% of what I'm going to say today in this folder with the same kinds of pictures. So Breast Cancer Prevention Institute, which, we're 15 years old this month in May, we have different materials that you can get. And you can download them all for free from our website. You don't have to buy a thing. So one thing is this risk and prevention booklet. It's downloadable. Talks about all risks. This is one about oral contraception. It says if it's not okay for him to take steroids, why is it okay for her? Because they're sex steroids women are taking. And on the back, there's all the references, and there's also places where you can get to natural family planning websites. So you give a woman the alternative. And this is a brochure on the pill kills. And it's the 4 ways that the pill can take a young woman's life. So with that, I'm going to start. So why is breast cancer spreading around the world? This is Time Magazine cover from 2007. We know that 1 in 10 of all new cancers diagnosed in the world is breast cancer. And the incidence of ductal carcinoma in situ has gone up 660% between 73 and 2000, and invasive cancers 36%. So we solved that problem in the United States by separating in situ from invasive cancers. But there's 67,000 cases of in situ cancers a year. So in the last 40 years, we see that breast cancer cases have gone up. And most of it's occurred in women of my generation. I graduated high school in '67. I went to college during the, sexual revolution. And it's the women of my generation that has had this greatest increase. Women delayed childbearing into their 30s. I was 41 when I had my first and only. And usually, they use the pill and abortion as a backup to delay that first pregnancy. 82% of all women in this country have taken the pill, 85% in Canada, and worldwide, 10% of all women. That's a huge number of women, and they want that number to go up. When the pill failed, women relied on abortion. About 30% of American women have had an abortion by the age of 45. And there's been 56 million abortions since 1973, and that doesn't include the chemical abortions. We came a long way. We started smoking And we got lung cancer at the same rates as men now. Cigarettes give breast cancer, cause breast cancer as well, as does alcohol. The other thing that happened is we remained childless. In 1975, about 10% of women never had a kid. But by the census data of 2000, it was 18%. It almost doubled. So more women went to college, more women climbed the corporate ladder, the pill was used, abortion is a backup. So all of those things increase breast cancer risk. So we can keep all the good things about women's lip. I'm glad I went to college and medical school and did 2 residencies. I'm happy about that. But I didn't have to delay childbearing until 41. I just simply didn't know that. So there's ways that we can make healthier choices. And to do that, women have to understand what's going on in their own bodies so that they can make intelligent choices. So what are the reproductive risks that women face? Well, how do they control their fertility? Do they do it with hormones, abortifacients, abortion? How many menstrual cycles do they have in their lifetime? Early menarche, late menopause, a lot of cycles, a lot of exposure to estrogen, higher risk. What about breast maturation? That's one of the key things. Do we have children or not? And if we have them, how many do we have? And if we have them, what's the age of the first full-term pregnancy? And do we breastfeed them when we have them? So if you want to understand breast cancer risk, about 10% of breast cancer is caused by direct damage to genes. Say you inherited a bad gene, or you got exposed to radiation and the radiation had damaged the DNA in your breast cell. But 90% of all the risks that you hear about is caused by how much exposure does that woman have to estrogen, and how soon did she differentiate her breast tissue into cancer-resistant tissue through a full-term pregnancy. So, what happened in 2005? The International Agency on Research of Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization, put out this monograph 91. You can Google IARC monograph 91 and get it for yourself. It's about 464 pages in a PDF file. And what they did was these scientists met in Lyon, France, and they looked at the world's literature on estrogen progestin combination drugs, which is the pill and hormone replacement, and they said that these were group 1 carcinogens for breast, cervical, and liver cancer. Now, did you hear about that on the 6 o'clock news? I know I did. So how do we have 85% of our women in our country taking a group 1 carcinogen? Now, there are 5 groups. Group 5 is maybe. Group 3 is, well, we have experimental evidence. Group 1 is we know for sure. So those drugs are in the same group as cigarettes for lung cancer, asbestos for mesothelioma. Now you often say, well, you know, they might cause breast, cervical, and liver cancer, but they are protective of endometrial cancer and ovarian cancer. But if you took 100 women in this country who had cancer, 36 had breast cancer, 6 have endometrial cancer, and 3 have ovarian cancer. And it's as if you were of the mindset that you had to trade off what kind of cancer you wanted to induce or protect yourself from. It's not a wash. Now, this will tell you everything about those drugs. And because we had good talks this morning about the menstrual cycle and NFP and birth control, we know a lot of this stuff already. So this is what I want you to really understand. When the ovary is in the follicular phase of your menstrual cycle, if you divide it in half, and ovulation is in the middle, when the ovary is just putting out estrogen, what's happening in your uterus? It's very proliferative. It's growing a lot. It's getting thicker. What's happening in your breast? Nothing. They're hanging out looking good. Then you ovulate. You ovulate. That egg pops out. And what does that cause? That causes that little dent in the ovary that becomes the corpus luteum. That makes progesterone. So then that woman has estrogen and progesterone together. What's happening in her endometrium? Something good. It's differentiating. It's becoming resistant to cancer. It stopped growing. Now it's getting differentiated to accept that embryo. And what's happening in your breast? Your breast is multiplying all its breast cells. It's getting edematous. That's why your breasts hurt you. They're very busy because estrogen-progesterone combinations stimulate the lining of your breast ducts, the epithelium. So anything that so when the pill first came out, it was pretty much estrogen only. And so the GYNs were giving it out, and what were they seeing? They were seeing uterine cancer. We hate that for GYNs. So let's add some progestin. Well, we didn't see the uterine cancer anymore, but then we saw the breast cancer, but it wasn't that much, and well, it happened. So that's the whole ball of wax. Why is it protective of ovarian cancer? Because the fewer times in life you ovulate, the less likely you are to develop ovarian cancer. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick. You see breast cells proliferating when you get that estrogen peak right before ovulation. Now, how does estrogen? Estrogen is this wonderful hormone that makes women women. It allows us to have children and have breasts, and it's wonderful. How could that possibly be a carcinogen? One way is that it causes proliferation and it promotes cancer. So everybody knows about the normal growth you get through the menstrual cycle, hyperplasia, and then eventually neoplasia. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to look at this normal duct, milk duct, with the glands, one cell layer stimulated by estrogen to duct hyperplasia. Then some of those cells start looking funny. Those are atypical ductal cells. That's atypical ductal hyperplasia. You get this stuff, your increased risk of breast cancer is going up 400%. And when one of those cells becomes cancerous and it starts growing up and down that milk duct and filling it up, that's ductal carcinoma in situ. And if that stuff hangs out long enough, eventually those cells mutate and grow out of the duct and become invasive cancers. Those are the type that can kill you. So it's estrogen stimulates the breast cells to proliferate, and anytime you proliferate, you got to copy the DNA, right? It's like copying a whole book. And the faster you do it, the more likely you are to make a mistake. So if you have a lot of proliferation going on, you can make a mistake in the DNA and have a mutation. Well, so what? I copied a sentence and left out the word the. Does that matter? Probably not. That sentence will still make sense. But then those mutations mutate. And eventually, you get so many mutated cells, you start leaving out the, adjectives. And what if you left out the word no in a sentence? That's a critical mutation. That sentence doesn't make sense anymore. So those mutations build up and you have uncontrolled proliferation, you get cancer. But it can be an actual carcinogen and genotoxic. So since 1988, when this lecture came out, showing estrogens were a cause of human cancer. We've known about it. And in 2001, the National Toxicology Advisory Committee put it on its list of carcinogens, and this AP reporter said, "Why did you do that?" And Michelle Medinsky said, "They only discussed the benefits. Listing it might force it on the table." Look at what happened in 2003, Journal of the National Cancer Institute. Poor David Longfellow. It's been an uphill battle to convince the mainstream that estrogen initiates cancer by damaging DNA. Now, how does that happen? Well, we have Eleanor Rogan in Nebraska, and she looked at the metabolism of estrogen. And what she found out was if you metabolize estrogen by hydroxylating it on the 4th carbon with an OH, there's like 19 carbons, and you do it there, you eventually end up with this chemical 4-hydroxycatechol-estrogen-quinone, and that pulls purine bases out of DNA chains. Now the purine bases are what makes the rungs of that ladder. And she even proved it clinically. She studied women with breast cancer and found women with breast cancer had higher levels of 4-hydroxycatechol-estrogen-quinone in their blood. So what about the beloved New England Journal of Medicine? In 2006, Yeager and Davidson put out this article, Estrogen Carcinogenesis in Breast Cancer, and said, studies of breast cancer consistently found an increased risk associated with the use of exogenous estrogen plus a progestin in oral contraceptives. Now, she got a lot of heat for that. There were letters to the editor in the next, set of volume, the next month, and they said to her, "How could you possibly say that, Nancy Davidson, after you supported the Marchbank study that said there was no risk?" And she said, "Because I changed my mind. It is a carcinogen." So this is a meta-analysis that was published in the Mayo Clinic proceedings of all the risks, all of the studies put together in a meta-analysis. Chris Callenborn did that. And he showed a 44% increased risk if oral contraceptives were used before a full-term pregnancy. And in the editorial, it said, one might have thought that the issue of whether oral contraceptives are associated with breast cancer risk would have been settled by now. It's been obvious since the 80s that it's caused breast cancer. Why isn't the Komen Foundation putting that out? Why don't breast cancer advocacy groups counsel young women about this? Now, why doesn't your doctor know about this? Well, I think of things like bad attitudes in textbooks. So this is taken from a British textbook, and it talks about the pill as risk, and it said there's a relative risk of developing breast cancer of 1.3. That means a 30% increased risk for breast cancer if you use the pill. And it goes on to say, considering the benefits of the pill, this slight increased risk is not considered clinically significant. Well, we always examine them every 6 months, and when we do find the cancers, they're stage 1 and 95% curable. And, 30% isn't a big risk. Atypical ductal hyperplasia, 400% increased risk, right? It's not such a big one. So, it's not considered clinically significant. But I would say to whom? This is my patient. She brought it in. That's her signature. And I took care of her in 2004, and she had avoidable risks. And she was at a young breast cancer survivors meeting in the midst of her chemotherapy. And this is what breast cancer in a young woman looks like. And she was very intelligent, and if she had known about these risks, there's a very good chance she would have chosen otherwise. So, to be fair to Father Blast check. Most women who take oral contraceptives won't get breast cancer. It's a small risk, but it's taken by millions of women. It's in the same class as drugs, as hormone replacement therapy. And we know that when millions of women stopped hormone replacement therapy in 2002, when the Women's Health Initiative study came out, there were 30 million women on hormone replacement therapy. They did hear about that study on the 6 o'clock news, and 15 out of 30 million women stopped. And by 2007, there was an 11% reduction in postmenopausal breast cancer that was estrogen receptor positive. Don't we want the same for our young women? Oral contraceptive drugs can be used for deficiencies. Now, someone may not have an ovary that makes progesterone. Well, okay. But why? We're at an ethics conference. When is it ever listed to give a healthy woman a group 1 carcinogen? Is it ever listed to give a group 1 carcinogen for breast, cervical, and liver cancer for a sign of health? Fertility, not a disease. Is it ever listed to give a woman a group 1 carcinogen when there are non-cancerous ways of achieving fertility control? And is it ever listed to give a group 1 carcinogen to a child, a healthy child? These children have acne, they get the pill. They have bad menstrual cramps, it's not a hot water bottle and some aspirin or Advil, it's the pill. Why are we doing that to children? So, just knowing that a personal choice has put a woman at higher risk is important because you get screened at an appropriate age. And if you find stage 0, the ductal carcinoma in situ, or stage 1, small tumor, no lymph node involvement, those are either 100%, 99%, 95% curable. But look at what happened to my patient, no hair and no breast. So early detection is not prevention. Look at what they talk about in my textbook, The Breast by Bland and Copeland. This is a table showing strategies and action for primary prevention of breast cancer. They say, don't be fat like me. Engage in physical activity. Our public policy should be bicycle paths to lower risks. And they put those sorts of things in the table, but if you read the text accompanying this table, look at what it says. Early age at first birth substantially reduces breast cancer. Unplanned early pregnancies and an average of more than 2 completed pregnancies per woman have undesirable social and ecological consequences, so we didn't put it in table 5. Now I'm mad because I went through medical school and all these residencies, and my mother died of breast cancer. How come I didn't know that having, I was married 17 years before I even tried. I would have had a child earlier on. And this thing is wrong. You need more than 2 children per couple to get, to maintain 0 growth. And then they are more worried about the fish. They care about the fish more than they do me. So why did they put this not in the table? Because when doctors are busy and we go to textbooks for answers, we look at graphs, we look at the table. But you have to read the fine print. So, most women with breast cancer haven't had an abortion. Most women with an abortion will never get breast cancer. Most women who smoke will never get lung cancer. Only 15% of people who smoke ever get lung cancer. But we still tell people not to smoke. We inform them. So we've known about the protective effect of full-term pregnancy since the Middle Ages, when it was only nuns that were getting breast cancer. Everybody else was Romeo and Juliet getting pregnant as teenagers, right? Or being a wet nurse. 1743, a nice Italian man, Ramazzini of Padua, wrote a paper showing that there was a protective effect of full-term pregnancy is reducing breast cancer risk. And today we know the molecular basis of that protective effect. This July of 2013, this paper came out in this journal Stem, and it said many cancers arise in the stem cells of the breast. Our breasts are always growing and making new breast tissue. We have to have stem cells. But that's where some cancers arise. And having a full-term pregnancy reduces the number of stem cells in the breast. And look at what you find in a pathology textbook. It says, you know, this is the stem cell, and that stem cell that they figure out is a stem cell because it has cytokeratin 514 in it, can either become the muscle around the duct. The milk doesn't get out of the breast just because the baby sucks. There has to be muscle squeezing it out. So some of it becomes the muscle, and some of it becomes the cells that make the milk. Those are fully differentiated. So those are the cells that don't get cancer in them. So let's forget about the independent risk of abortion and breast cancer and the studies that show that. Let's just go on what we know and everybody agrees with. A full-term pregnancy lowers a woman's risk for breast cancer. Known that since the Middle Ages. Each additional pregnancy lowers her risk another 10%. For each year a woman delays her pregnancy after 20, she increases her risk of premenopausal breast cancer 5% per year, and for postmenopausal breast cancer 3% per year. And we know that induced abortion increases the risk of premature birth. And if that premature birth is less than 32 weeks, we know that that doubles breast cancer risk. Think about labor. It takes hours to make that cervix dilate, and hours to make it efface so a head can get through. And it's a delicate organ. You got like a little thing like this holding in 9 pounds of baby and all that amniotic fluid. How is that happening? Now, when I do an abortion, I'm not going to take hours physiologically dilating your cervix. I damage it. So the more abortions you have, the more likely you are to have a full-term premature birth. So those 4 facts necessarily cause a pregnant woman who chooses an abortion to have an increased risk of breast cancer. So a woman is pregnant. Maybe it was unplanned, but there's unplanned joy. If she chooses to have that pregnancy, she will have lowered her risk. But if she chooses to end it with an induced abortion before 32 weeks, she'll lose the benefit of a full-term pregnancy. She'll delay that pregnancy, right? She's 16, has the abortion, and waits till she's 26 to have the kid. Or maybe she never has a kid and remains nulliparous. And maybe when she does get pregnant again, she'll have a premature birth before 32 weeks. About 3% of all premature births, less than 37 weeks are 32 weeks or less. So how does that work? What's the biology? It all has to do with how we mature our breast tissue. So this is what happens. The first half of pregnancy, Robin Williams said that as soon as his wife would get pregnant, the breast fairy would visit. Boom. Now, what happens? You double the volume of breast tissue by 20 weeks. And it's in the second half of pregnancy you differentiate it. Remember, proliferation is when we're making those mutations. So, this is how the breast works, you know, lobes. The lobes are made into lobules, you know, that's how we divide them. And the lobules are in turn made of cells, okay? So you have like 15 to 25 lobes. They're made of lobules. The lobules are made of individual breast cells. Now, this is a schematic drawing of what you're kind of born with. 11 ductules. Those ductules become the glands that make the milk. Then at puberty, you start making more ductules. Those are type 2, 47 ductules per lobular unit. And then when they're fully matured, after you've made the milk, and then you stop making the milk, they become type 3, and those have an average of 80. Now, it isn't the morphology that protects you from the breast cancer. It's because they're so different metabolically. So the type 1 lobules, they have a lot of estrogen and progesterone receptors. And they have the highest rate of cell proliferation. You get through the second part of your menstrual cycle where the estrogen and progesterone are there, they're multiplying like crazy. And there's all sorts, they copy their DNA real quick. They have a short doubling time. But by the time they get down to type 3, which are the ones that have gone through a full-term pregnancy, you barely have any estrogen or progesterone receptors in your nuclei. They're not reacting to it anymore. And this Ki-67 is a protein that we measure to see how proliferative, how active these cells are. It's very low. So metabolically, they're different. So this is actually what they look like in photomicrographs, type 1, type 2, and type 3. Now why is that important? Because type 1 lobules, they used to be called TDLUs, terminal ductal lobular units. And right where that pointer is, that's where the stem cells are. That's where ductal cancers start. Type 1 lobules are where ductal cancers start. And ductal cancers are 85% of all breast cancers in this country. In type 2 lobules, they start lobular cancers, and they're about 10 to 15% of all cancers. But type 3 lobules, the good ones, the green ones, they don't get cancer. So, the breast doubles in volume, first half of pregnancy. What are you making more of? You're making more of the immature stuff that is cancer susceptible. Second half of pregnancy, you make the good ones. The type 4s that have the colostrum, that are going to make the milk. Now, how is all of that happening? Well, look at this chart down here. So 0 to 40 is like a full-term pregnancy. What happens? As soon as you get pregnant, when that embryo is floating down the fallopian tube, it's secreting HCG. So HCG zooms up. And what is it doing? It's telling that mother's ovaries, start producing a lot of estrogen and progesterone, you're pregnant. Get ready. And it does. Well, what happens later on? Well, you made a lot of stuff, so it starts to go down around 20 weeks. But what's happening over here? HPL, human placental lactogen. And look at where it starts to level off that curve. That curve starts to level off around 32 weeks. And that's when you start getting the protective effect of that pregnancy. So, this is about how fearfully and wonderfully we're made. So HPL is made by the fetal placental unit. And HCG is too. And at the point in time when that HCG is making our breasts really get big, it's also stimulating the production of inhibin, which is a tumor suppressor protein. So at the point in your life where you're most susceptible, because your breast is getting huge and proliferating like crazy and maybe making mutations, HCG is causing inhibin to form. So Irma Russo, who is actually the pathologist that used to look under the microscope and count the little ductules in the 80s and developed all of this stuff, she, at this point, and she passed away this summer, she started using HCG and got tumors, breast tumors, to regress. So that's a good thing. So, lobular structures. This is the only thing you have to remember. Before full-term pregnancy, 75% of your breast tissue is either type 1 lobules, about 25% type 2s. These are the places where cancers start. But after a full-term pregnancy, you get the good green ones, lobules type 3. So, this is in your little handout. After puberty, before a full-term pregnancy, about 30% of that mound you see is actually breast tissue, and it's all cancer susceptible. You get pregnant, by the end of the first trimester, look how big your breasts are, but they're bigger with the types of lobules that form the cancer. By the end of the third trimester, 85% of your breast tissue is matured and is making that colostrum. And then after you wean, you're left with the type 3 lobules that are cancer resistant. That's why abortion is an independent risk. It leaves your breasts with more places for cancers to start. So before full-term pregnancy, some breast tissue. But after you're pregnant, a lot more. So you would well imagine that the later we have an abortion during our pregnancy, the higher our risk of getting breast cancer, because the more we would have formed. And that's absolutely true, as shown by those papers by Melby and Daly. And so think of our poor teenagers. They have irregular periods, they're in denial, they're hoping they're not. They present in the second trimester after wearing baggy clothes. We don't want to ruin their life. We want them to go to college. We take them for an abortion in the second trimester. And then we say, that was very traumatic for you. We don't want that to happen to you again. And you're a little frisky. So I'm not going to trust you with the pill. Let me shoot you up with some Depo-Provera, because I only have to capture you every 3 months to get that shot in you so you don't get pregnant again. And Depo-Provera, progestin-only contraceptive, doubles breast cancer risk. So now not only is this girl got more places for cancers to start, but then we give her a group 1 carcinogen, the pill, or we shoot her full of Depo. And can we wonder why we see more premenopausal breast cancer? I think not. Now, 23% of all pregnancies will end in a spontaneous abortion. Now, does that increase risk? Well, there was this high-risk OB clinic in Switzerland, and the 2 doctors there would have these women, they would come in spotting, and they would say, oh, we're going to lose the baby. And what they did was something very simple. Estrogen should go up along with your week's gestation. So they would draw a tube of blood and measure their estradiol, and if it was in the normal range, those women kept their pregnancies. But if the estrogen level was very low, those were the ones that would miscarry. So how many women do you know that said, wow, I miscarried, I didn't even know I was pregnant? Well, why is that? Because your hormonal levels were low. You didn't get nauseous. Your breast didn't hurt. So after a spontaneous abortion, your breasts haven't changed. Now that's different than spontaneous abortions or miscarriages in the second trimester that are usually due to physical problems, like the cord gets wrapped around the neck and the baby dies. Those are hormonally normal pregnancies. But if they're not, if they're like most miscarriages, they won't increase your risk. So after an induced abortion, more places for cancers to start. After spontaneous abortion, not. Okay, now, I'm going to talk about pregnancy as being a double-edged sword. And I know that there are mothers in this room. And so some of you are thinking this. You have this child, she's delightful, and then this happens. Now, if you notice what's happening there, look at that. there are these portals that develop where the aliens enter, and then you don't know who this child is anymore, and then you just pray that they come out soon. They usually do. However, pregnancy is a double-edged sword is this. If you're 20 and you have a full-term pregnancy, your risk goes down right away. But what if you're like me and you wait until you're 40? Well, I had all that immature breast tissue for all those years. You know, between the time I'm 10, say, I didn't have one, but say you're 10 and have an early menarche, and you don't get pregnant until you're 30, that's 20 years of having susceptible tissue. And during those 20 years, maybe I smoked cigarettes and formed some mutations in my breast. And maybe there's a cancer cell sitting there that I don't know about. And all of a sudden I'm filled with estrogen and progesterone, and those cancer cells and those mutated cells start growing like crazy. Well, if you wait till you're 35, you've got a 40% increased risk of breast cancer that doesn't go down and give you the protective effect for about 10 to 15 years. And that's why we're getting so many pregnancy-related breast cancers now, because most women are waiting, and when they're waiting, they're taking the pill. So that's why you get, for every year after age 20 that you wait, you have a 5% per year increased risk of breast cancer. It has to do with the susceptibility window. Now, what about that risk of preterm delivery and breast cancer? This is a slide that shows breast cancer risk related to the gestational age when you deliver. Look at this. If you have a full-term pregnancy, they gave you a relative risk of 1. That meant that it didn't increase or decrease your risk. They gave it a number 1. What if you delivered at between 36 and 37 weeks, and you didn't have as much differentiated breast tissue? Well, your breast risk went up a little bit, 2 out of 100, 0.2% or something like that. But look at this big jump that happens between 31 and 32 weeks. If you delivered between 32 and 33 weeks, your breast cancer risk was 12% higher than if you delivered full term. And what if it was before 32 weeks? It doubled. You had 100% increased risk. So there is something magic that happens around 32 weeks. I don't know what it is, but that is a cutoff point. So, March of Dimes. Look at these poor preemies, and won't you give us money? And, okay, the Institute of Medicine had this. They wanted to look into why we have so many premature births. So they put out this paper in this study. And in the general population, 12.5% of women in this country deliver 37 weeks or less. What about black women? 17.5% deliver prematurely before 37 weeks. And why is that? Well, it could have to do with the fact that even though black women are 11% of the population, they represent 38% of the abortions. Now, in this paper, look what they put in Appendix B, Table B5, immutable medical risk factors associated with preterm birth. Prior first trimester induced abortion, 2006. Did anybody tell the March of Dimes? Did you hear about it on the 6 o'clock news? Well, there are 2 large meta-analyses that show that. And this is one paper that shows the more abortions you have, and you say, well, who has a lot of abortions? Half the women who have 1 abortion have 2. 47% of women who have an abortion have had more than 1. So, why is that important? Well, a premature delivery means you have a delivery of a live infant. And we know that doubles breast cancer risk if it's 32 weeks or less. Induced abortion is the delivery of a dead infant. Physiologically, it's the same. We accept premature birth, we don't accept induced abortion. It's the same cartoon. You've left more places for cancers to start with either circumstance. So in 2003, the National Cancer Institute had a workshop where they were going to look at early reproductive events in breast cancer. There were 100 scientists there, and save one dissenter. They concluded that abortion is so not a risk factor for breast cancer, we shouldn't study it anymore. Now, when they came to the thing about premature birth, they said, well, you know, we know it increases risk, but that's an epidemiologic gap. You know, it happens, we should study it, we don't know why. Now, that workshop for me was like this. Albert Einstein was a Jew, Nazi Germany, right? Hated Jews that were prominent. He had his theory of relativity. He was very famous. And so the Nazis went to 100 physicists. 2 of them were Nobel laureates, and they said, we'd like you to write an essay on why you think the theory of relativity isn't true. And they published those 100 essays in a book, 100 essays against Einstein. So Albert Einstein's walking through an airport after this book comes out, and they say, Dr. Einstein, what do you think about that? And he says, if it wasn't true, it would have only taken one. You do not arrive at truth by consensus. It's either true or it's not true. So, then you have this thing where Ellen Goodman's a columnist for the Boston Globe, and a year after that 2003 conference, she wrote this. Research linking breast cancer to abortion keeps reappearing no matter how many scientists drive a stake through its heart. And you know what I say to Ellen? It's the biology, right? And what do we have now? This is from February 26th, just 2 months ago. We have in the Rolling Stone, what are the biggest lies? The self-war on abortion rights? Abortion causes breast cancer. That's a big lie that we're told, that we're telling. Well, it's the biology. You will never change the biology of a woman's breast, no matter how politically incorrect it becomes. So why is breast cancer spreading throughout the world? 2007, that very year, Patrick Carroll wrote this paper. He's an actuary from London, and he has access to these registries in Europe, abortion registries, cancer registries, and he looked at 9 countries, England and Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Sweden, Czech Republic, Finland, and Denmark. And the greatest predictor of what a country's breast cancer rates would be was their abortion rates. And then you would say, well, if that's true, could we see evidence of the reverse? And we can. Under Ceausescu, Romania had one of the lowest breast cancer rates in Western Europe. But in 1989, he annoyed a lot of people and they hanged him. And then they changed the policy of the country. So Ceausescu was trying to make his country more populous and forbade abortion. And now, all of a sudden, that was their Roe v. Wade. And Romania's breast cancer incidence went up. So why is this important to physicians? Because you have to understand what increases risk so that you can screen your patients at an appropriate age. A woman who has an abortion at 16 should start getting screened 8 to 10 years later. Because to go from 1 cancer cell that keeps doubling to 2, 4, 8, 16, to get a tumor mass of 1 centimeter takes 8 to 10 years. And that's when we can find them. And then we have to give accurate information to patients to get valid informed consent for elective procedures. So what do they do in Catholic hospitals on the West Coast? Women come in and they have anencephalic babies. And they say, oh, we're a Catholic hospital, we can't do an abortion on you. But the point of viability, where half the babies live, is around 26 weeks. And we don't want to have to make you go through that whole pregnancy, you know, with this anencephalic baby. So I know we'll induce labor at 26 weeks. So instead of having that woman get a benefit of that pregnancy and allowing her to have a full-term pregnancy and reducing her risk, and having that baby and have a perinatal hospice so she could actually see her baby and her siblings could see that baby, they induce premature delivery. I mean, I don't think that's good. And then you have to be able to give accurate information for family planning and fertility control. No, we don't think it's good for an idea for you to have a group 1 carcinogen to control your fertility. When we know enough about fertility to know the 100 hours a month when we're fertile. So this is an example of a history and risk assessment form that I use in my hospital. Or actually, I use it in my office, and I made them use it in the breast center, where you ask somebody not only gravidipara AB, how many times were you pregnant, how many kids did you have, you ask how old were you when you had that first pregnancy, and how did it end? Live birth, stillbirth, miscarriage, abortion. And then you can see the pattern and know when they're in their susceptibility window and they got exposed to a carcinogen. Now, why is that susceptibility window so important? The susceptibility window is between menarche and I have a full-term pregnancy or one lasting longer than 32 weeks where my breast tissue matures and I have some protection. Look at this. This is a study that was done in 2002 in Lancet. If you had a nulliparous woman, a childless woman smoke, the benzopyrenes in that cigarette smoke increased her breast cancer risk to a relative risk of 7.08, a 600% increased risk. But if she was Paris, if she had a kid, and smoked with, you know, she was young, her relative risk only went up 1.69% or 69%. That's almost a tenfold difference because when she smoked, most of her breast tissue was resistant to carcinogens. And what happened to the Paris postmenopausal women? What if they took up smoking after they went through menopause? Well, they may have died of a stroke or a heart attack, but their breast cancer risk went down. And the reason was nicotine is metabolized to cotinine, and cotinine is an aromatase enzyme inhibitor. It keeps our fat from turning androstenedione, which is a male kind of hormone, into estrogen. So that's why postmenopausal obesity increases risk. We have more fat, we have more estrogen. Whereas these postmenopausal women smoking, they were getting the benefit of having a naturally occurring aromatase enzyme inhibitor. So this is why it's important to patients. You have to have patients understand their breast cancer risk because we don't need to screen everybody all the time. So if you have a family history of colon cancer, and the youngest person in your family that got colon cancer was 26, you're going to get a colonoscopy before you're 50. So we need to identify women at higher risk so that we can screen them properly. And when you're young, you have very dense breasts, so mammograms aren't so great, but MRIs could help. Or ultrasound could help. And then we have to have women making informed choices about when they're going to have their first kid. Do they do it early in marriage or late? What about those unplanned pregnancies? Do they have abortions or is adoption a better option? And do we induce women who have a fetal abnormality and give them premature labors? So that's the end of my talk. And I got 5 minutes, I guess, for questions and to let Father Pahocha.
Thank you very much. Three questions, if possible. Again, the first two are short. Does lactation in women offer any protection after if the delivery was less than 32 weeks?
I think that it would. I don't have any data on it, but the more breast tissue that's fully matured, the better.
And is there any work on giving bioidentical hormones in women who delivered less than 32 weeks to promote differentiation?
They've been trying to make a cocktail that would mimic a pregnancy to help women differentiate their breast tissue. They've been unsuccessful. I think that it's impossible if you really know what's happening during pregnancy. I showed you like 2 or 3 things, but there's a gazillion things that are happening. So bioidentical hormones, your own body's estrogen that your ovary produces itself can be carcinogenic. So why would bioidentical be better?
Okay, and in terms of levonorgestrel, which is the drug in Plan B, now available over the counter, and at least by some, at least it seems like some bishops have even approved it in certain Catholic hospitals in the case of rape. Regardless of whether or not it may or may not cause problems with implantation, what do you think about levonorgestrel in terms of it being a definite carcinogen alone without being in combined hormone replacement therapy or as a combined oral contraceptive?
I mean, you always have estrogen around, no matter what part of your cycle you're in, and you have estrogen around in your body, whether you're postmenopausal or not. So you know, I don't know of any specific studies, but I know that progestins, which are synthetic progesterones, cause cancer. Cannot be a good idea. Plus, you only want to give those drugs if you are certain that they haven't already ovulated. So then you have to get in that little LH peak. It's very difficult to say that that would be okay.
Isn't it true that they could still have a post-ovulatory effect even if given pre-ovulation, since there's a high incidence of breakthrough ovulation?
I think that's best answered by Dr. Lawler.
Thank you.
I do breast surgery.